"The wife won't let the boy walk," the poor boy revealed to the millionaire. The sun lit up the flawless gardens of Ricardo's mansion, a reflection of a life filled with luxury, power, and wealth. But behind the perfect scenery, there was a heavy silence, a void that no fortune could fill. His only son, Enrique, once joyful and full of energy, was now confined to a wheelchair, his eyes sad and lost. No one truly understood what had happened. Doctors talked about neurological issues, but nothing explained the boy's sudden inability to walk. Ricardo, who had already lost his wife in an accident, now faced the fear of also losing his son's happiness. His new wife, Lorena, seemed to be the pillar holding the house together. Always smiling, she cared for Enrique with a devotion that everyone praised. Yet deep down, Ricardo carried a silent anguish, as the boy wasn't getting better despite so many treatments. And it was in this scene of apparent tranquility that something unexpected happened. As he was strolling with Enrique through the mansion's gardens, Ricardo heard a noise coming from the bushes. Before the guards could react, a thin, dirty boy in torn clothes ran toward him. His eyes were alive, intense, filled with a mix of desperation and courage. The guards prepared to chase him off, but Ricardo raised his hand, intrigued. The boy, who looked about 10, was breathing hard, as if he had run for miles. Then, suddenly, he pointed a steady finger at Enrique, his voice choked with emotion. "Your wife won't let him walk." Ricardo's world seemed to stop at that instant. The phrase dropped like a bomb, shattering the artificial calm that surrounded the mansion. He looked at Enrique, who averted his gaze, embarrassed, as if hiding a secret. Ricardo's heart raced. It made no sense. How could someone prevent a child from walking? Was it just the ravings of a hungry street kid, or was there something behind that accusation? The poor boy, still panting, didn't back down. His eyes gleamed with truth and conviction, as if he had witnessed something no one else had the courage to see. There was an intensity in his words that sparked an uncomfortable doubt in the millionaire's mind. Ricardo swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure. The guards looked at him, waiting for orders. Enrique, silent, squeezed the arms of his wheelchair, and the unknown boy remained there, firm, staring at the richest man in the city, as if he were the only one capable of hearing the truth. That simple scene in the middle of the perfect garden was about to change everything. Ricardo's heart filled with questions. What did that boy know? And if it were true, it was only the beginning of a revelation that would transform their lives forever. Ricardo stood still, trying to process what he had just heard. The light breeze stirred the surrounding trees, but inside him a storm was about to explode. The millionaire, accustomed to controlling everything around him, felt vulnerable in the face of an unknown boy's words. "What do you mean my wife won't let him walk?" his voice asked, firm but filled with uncertainty. The boy, still breathless, didn't back down. "I saw her. She holds him down, doesn't let him get up. She puts things in his food." "I swear I saw it." The guards exchanged suspicious glances, ready to remove the intruder, but Ricardo raised his hand again, stopping any action. His heart beat faster and faster. What if it was just a lie from a starving boy trying to get attention? There was something in the boy's eyes that couldn't be ignored. Enrique, hunched in his chair, seemed to tremble. His eyes didn't meet his father's. His silence spoke louder than 1,000 words. Ricardo approached the street boy, trying to soften his voice. "What's your name?" "Pedro," he replied, steady. Ricardo took a deep breath. The simple name of someone who clearly had nothing. Torn clothes, a dirty face, but an impressive courage. Pedro didn't tremble or look away. It was as if carrying that truth was more important than any punishment he might receive for invading the mansion. Lorena appeared in the distance, calling out to Enrique with the syrupy voice she always used. Pedro's gaze immediately changed. He suddenly stood up and shouted, "She's coming!" "She can't know I spoke to you." In a second, the boy ran back the way he had come, disappearing among the bushes. Ricardo, still in shock, had no time to stop him. He was left with only the echo of those words in his mind. "Your wife won't let him walk." Lorena approached, bringing her usual artificial calm. She smiled at her husband and caressed Enrique's shoulders with a rehearsed tenderness. "Is everything all right, dear? Why the serious face?" Ricardo feigned normalcy, but inside his heart screamed. An uncomfortable doubt was now in place, and it wouldn't be easy to shake. What did Pedro mean? Did he really see something? Suddenly, the millionaire's world seemed to have changed color. The garden no longer looked so beautiful. The silence was no longer peaceful but suffocating. And Henrique, his son, seemed to carry a secret in his eyes, as if pleading for someone to discover the truth. Ricardo didn't know it then, but at that moment his life was beginning to spiral out of control. That night, Ricardo couldn't sleep. He paced his room, looking out the window of the mansion, which felt more and more like a gilded cage. Pedro's words echoed in his mind like a relentless hammer. "Your wife won't let him walk." He remembered every time Lorena had prevented Henrique from trying to get up from his chair. He remembered how she always insisted on preparing the boys' meals alone, refusing any help from the cooks or staff. It all seemed so natural at the time, but now, with Pedro's words, it took on a new, dark meaning. In the next room, Henrique was asleep. Ricardo entered slowly, watching his son. The boy was breathing softly, but his face showed a sadness that broke his heart. Ricardo knelt beside the bed, caressing his hair. "Son," he whispered, almost without realizing it, "what are they doing to you?" Henrique slowly opened his eyes, as if he had heard his father's heartfelt call. For a few seconds he stared at Ricardo in silence. His eyes welled up, but no words came from his mouth. He just turned his face to the side, as if he were afraid to answer. The millionaire's heart ached. Something was there, he felt it. But how could he get the truth out of a child who seemed terrified? The next morning, Ricardo paid closer attention to the routine. Lorena came into Henrique's room with a breakfast tray. The smell of fresh tea filled the air. He saw her put a few discreet drops into a cup. The movements were almost imperceptible. "What is that?" he asked suddenly, his voice firm. Lorena smiled, surprised but without losing her composure. "A natural medicine to relax his muscles. The doctors said it helps." Ricardo nodded slowly, but his suspicion only grew. He didn't ask anything else, just watched, pretending to believe. Hours later, as he was leaving the mansion for business, his eyes were drawn to a shadow between the gates. Pedro was there again, hidden behind a tree. The boy ran over when he saw Ricardo was alone. "I told you the truth," he said, out of breath. "I saw her put something in his juice. I saw it with my own eyes." Ricardo held the boy's shoulder and looked deep into his eyes. There was sincerity there, but also fear. "If this is true, you're in danger, Pedro." The boy bit his lips, hesitating. Then, in a low voice, he murmured, "I'm not the one in danger. It's your son." That phrase hit Ricardo like a punch to the gut. His heart raced with Pedro's last words. The image of his helpless son, confined to a wheelchair, mixed with the fear that was beginning to dominate his mind. He took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. He was a man accustomed to facing ruthless businessmen, negotiating million-dollar contracts, and handling pressures that would make many crumble. But nothing prepared him for the shock of imagining that someone within his own house could be slowly destroying his son's life. "Tell me exactly what you saw, Pedro." His voice came out firm, but the tone of urgency was impossible to hide. The boy looked around as if he feared being heard, and spoke quickly. "I sleep near the wall of your house at the back. Sometimes I can see through the window. I saw her pushing him back to bed when he tried to stand up. I saw her dripping a liquid into his juice glass. I know what I saw." Each word fell on Ricardo like an unbearable weight. Anger began to mix with his doubt. And if it were true, if Lorena was really keeping Henrique trapped in that chair on purpose, "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. Pedro took a deep breath, hesitated for an instant, and then responded with a sincerity that didn't match his age. "Because I can't stand to see him suffer. I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like to have nothing, but he doesn't deserve this." Ricardo remained silent, observing every detail of the boy. The torn clothes, the bare feet, the dirt on his face. Everything pointed to a life of misery. Still, his eyes shone with an uncommon courage. He didn't seem to want money or help, just the chance to save Henrique. It was a painful contrast. This street boy with nothing showed more compassion than many of the wealthy adults who frequented his parties. Suddenly, the sound of a distant engine made Pedro flinch. His eyes widened. "I have to go," he said quickly before disappearing among the trees like a shadow. Ricardo stood still, staring into the void. For the first time, the mansion seemed oppressive to him. The garden, which had always been a symbol of beauty and power, now seemed to hide dark secrets. Even the wind seemed to carry a warning. When he entered the house again, he found Lorena coming down the stairs. Her smile was too perfect, almost rehearsed. "Is everything all right, dear?" she asked softly. "You look worried." He just nodded, hiding the turmoil within him, but a certainty had already settled. He needed to find out the truth, no matter the cost. Later, as he went up to Henrique's room, he noticed something he had previously ignored. When Lorena entered with him, the boy averted his gaze and hunched his shoulders. It wasn't just sadness, it was fear. A shiver ran down Ricardo's spine. He knew with absolute clarity that he could no longer close his eyes. The night fell on the mansion, bringing an unsettling silence. Ricardo paced his office, lit only by the faint light of a lamp. The heavy curtains fluttered in the night breeze, and the distant sound of crickets contrasted with the storm of thoughts in his mind. Pedro's words echoed non-stop. "I saw it." She doesn't let him walk. She puts things in his food. Ricardo felt torn. Part of him wanted to believe it was just the invention of a street kid, someone hungry trying to get attention. But another part, growing stronger by the minute, recognized that it made sense. He remembered every one of Lorena's gestures, every cup of tea served with insistence, every time she had turned away doctors and physical therapists under the excuse that she didn't want to stress Henrique. Everything that had seemed like care now sounded like manipulation. He opened the desk drawer and took out an old photo, Henrique as a small child, running in the garden next to his deceased mother. The boy's happy eyes in the photo were a cruel contrast to the dull expression he now carried. Ricardo closed his eyes, feeling the pain of loss and the fury growing inside him. He couldn't allow his son to be destroyed before his very eyes. In the next room, Henrique was sleeping. Ricardo entered silently and sat by the bed. He watched the boy breathe slowly, noticing every detail. The fragile body, the fingers moving lightly, the tired expression. He touched his hand, and for an instant Henrique opened his eyes. "Daddy," he whispered in a low voice, almost a plea for help. Ricardo smiled, trying to hide his emotion. "I'm here, my son. I'll always be here." Henrique bit his lips as if he wanted to say something, but then turned his face to the wall. Ricardo understood. There was fear. The boy wanted to talk but couldn't. Lorena kept him a prisoner, even in his silence. The millionaire stood up, determined. He wouldn't wait anymore. He needed proof. He needed the raw, naked truth. The next day, he would discreetly have cameras installed in strategic locations: the kitchen, Enrique's room, the corridors. Nothing would escape his sight. As he thought about the plan, he felt the weight of his loneliness. Even surrounded by luxury, he was a man alone, unable to trust his own wife. Who would have thought that his only clue to the truth would come from a street boy? At that moment, he understood something profound, that wealth doesn't mean security, and that innocence can see what eyes accustomed to power refuse to see. As he left the room, Ricardo looked at his sleeping son one last time and silently swore, "I will save you, no matter the cost." It was only the beginning of the battle. The next day dawned with a heavy gray sky, as if even the weather sensed the weight that had fallen on the mansion. Ricardo woke up early, his eyes swollen from a restless night. He had spent hours tossing and turning in bed, alert to every creak of the house as if they were warning signs. Now sitting at the breakfast table, he watched Lorena smile as if nothing were wrong. "Did you sleep well, dear?" she asked, serving her coffee with her usual rehearsed delicacy. Ricardo just nodded, hiding his gaze. Every one of her gestures seemed calculated, as if she were an actress playing the perfect wife. And inside, he felt like a stranger in his own home. When Lorena got up to get something from the kitchen, Ricardo took the opportunity to watch Henrique. The boy stared at the plate of fruit with suspicion, moving the pieces around without eating anything. The father realized how significant that was. Even food now seemed like a silent enemy. Later, when Lorena left to handle some business at the beauty salon, Ricardo put his plan into action. He discreetly called 2 trusted employees and had small cameras installed in strategic places: the kitchen, Henrique's room, and the hallway near the master bedroom. His heart pounded with every step. If Lorena found out, the charade could end prematurely. While the technicians worked, Ricardo walked through the garden. The wind shook the trees forcefully, and he thought of Pedro. A street boy had risked his own safety to warn a man who had everything but couldn't see anything. This contrast hammered in his mind. How could someone with nothing be so brave, while he, the owner of a fortune and power, was so slow to see the obvious? That night, Ricardo locked himself in his office and began to review the first recordings. On the computer screen, Lorena appeared in the kitchen. She distractedly stirred a cup of tea, then took a small vial and poured almost invisible drops into the liquid before taking the cup to Henrique's room. Ricardo's blood ran cold. It was real. There was no more doubt. He felt his hands tremble, but he took a deep breath. Now he had the proof he needed. What was once only a street boy's suspicion was now before his eyes in undeniable images. The dilemma, however, was enormous. Should he confront Lorena immediately or wait for the right moment to act? One false step, and he could lose his son forever. Ricardo leaned back in his armchair, staring at the screen as if it were a mirror of his own weakness. He was facing the truth, but he still didn't know if he would have the courage to act. In the silence of the night, he promised himself that he would protect Henrique at all costs. Ricardo spent the entire night wide awake, his eyes fixed on the computer screen, repeatedly reviewing the recordings he had obtained. Each second seemed to weigh tons on his chest. The image of Lorena leaning over the cup, dripping almost invisible drops before taking the tea to Henrique, burned like fire in his mind. He tried to convince himself that he might be misinterpreting it, but the more he watched, the clearer the truth became. It wasn't care, it was poison. The dawn found him still sitting there, his hands clenched on the arms of the chair. His face was marked by fatigue, but his eyes reflected something new, a mix of anger and fear. Anger at the betrayal, fear of what might happen if he didn't act fast. With a racing heart, he began to review other recordings, and the more he went through, the more dark details emerged. Lorena appeared on different days, always with that vial hidden in her hand, sometimes in the morning coffee, others in the afternoon juice. Even in soups she personally took to Henrique's room. It was a cold, calculated, repeated pattern. Ricardo's stomach churned. Each scene was a blow, and with each blow, the mask of the perfect wife fell into pieces. He wasn't facing a mistake, but a continuous plan. His mind began to fill with unanswered questions. How long had this been going on? How much poison had Henrique already ingested? How much of the boy's weakness was her fault? With each thought, the feeling of powerlessness grew. In the midst of despair, the memory of Pedro came to him. The street boy had no cameras, no money, no nothing, and yet he had seen the truth before anyone else. Ricardo closed his eyes and took a deep breath, ashamed of his own blindness. It was late morning when Lorena entered his office, bringing a soft smile and a cup of coffee. "I thought you might like something warm to start the day." Her voice was sweet, but now Ricardo heard the poison hidden behind every syllable. He thanked her with a nod and left the cup untouched on the table. He forced a smile, but sweat was dripping down his back. The game had begun, and he needed to stay calm. When she left, Ricardo stared at the cup as if it were a silent weapon. He couldn't just explode, not without a guarantee that Henrique would be safe. He needed a strategy. He needed to think like someone playing chess with his own life at stake. And for the first time, he understood that he was facing an invisible war being fought inside his own home. The rest of the day dragged on like a slow nightmare. Ricardo tried to maintain appearances, smiling in trivial conversations with Lorena. But inside he felt like a man on the edge of an abyss. Every word she spoke seemed rehearsed. Every gesture carried a silent threat that only he now perceived. When he managed to get a moment alone with Henrique, he entered the room and closed the door slowly, as if the simple sound could attract suspicion. The boy was sitting on the bed, his eyes downcast, nervously fidgeting with his fingers. "Son, I need you to be honest with me," Ricardo said, sitting next to him. "Do you feel anything strange after eating or drinking what your stepmother brings you?" Henrique looked up with fear. For an instant he seemed ready to deny it, but the tears in his eyes betrayed the truth. "I do, Dad. I didn't want to say anything, but sometimes the juice tastes bitter. I get dizzy, I feel weak, and she says it's normal, that it's all in my head." Ricardo's heart ached. The confirmation hurt more than any physical wound. He held his son's hands and said firmly, "You're not crazy, my son, and I'm going to protect you." Henrique cried in silence, leaning his head on his father's shoulder. Ricardo hugged him, trying to give him strength, although he was shattered inside. Suddenly they heard footsteps in the hallway. Ricardo got up quickly, wiping the boy's tears. The door opened and Lorena appeared with a sweet smile. "Is everything all right in here?" she asked her, eyes resting on them with a look that Ricardo now recognized as vigilant. "Yes," he replied, forcing a natural tone, just talking a bit. Lorena nodded, but her lingering gaze on Henrique made Ricardo shiver. She knew when control was slipping from her hands, and that moment had displeased her. After she left, Ricardo took a deep breath. He needed to act fast. Having the recordings wasn't enough. He needed solid, irrefutable proof that could end that farce for good. The mere idea of losing his son to that woman made him tremble. That night, he decided to intensify the monitoring. He would record not only the kitchen, but also every visit Lorena made to Henrique's room. Nothing would escape his control. As he adjusted the plans, the memory of Pedro returned. Maybe it was time to look for him again. The boy could be a key piece to understanding how far Lorena was willing to go. Ricardo knew time was running out. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the mansion became unbearable. Ricardo feigned normalcy, but he felt the tension in every corner of the house. Lorena, in turn, seemed more watchful than ever. Her eyes scanned the corridors. She observed his every move as if she suspected that something had changed. The sweet smile was still there, but now it came with questions that were too subtle to be innocent. "You've been working late, haven't you?" she would say, tilting her head with apparent concern. "You've been nervous, dear?" And every time she spoke, Ricardo realized they weren't just words. They were probes, attempts to find out how much her husband still believed in her facade. Henrique, meanwhile, seemed more and more dejected. He avoided the dishes Lorena brought. He pretended he wasn't hungry, but his fragility was evident. Ricardo watched in silence, not yet brave enough to intervene openly. The fear that Lorena would notice his surveillance and become even more dangerous paralyzed him. One night, while reviewing new recordings, Ricardo caught another disturbing detail. It wasn't just poison. Lorena was also tampering with his son's medicine. She switched pills and mixed liquids in vials that were supposed to contain vitamins. Her control was absolute, as if every detail of Henrique's life had to pass through her hands. Despair took hold of him. It was no longer enough to just think about evidence. He needed a rescue plan, a way to protect Henrique immediately. But how could he do it without arousing suspicion? The next morning, upon entering his son's room, he found Lorena sitting in the armchair, calmly combing his hair. Henrique was huddled in bed, his eyes half closed. "He didn't sleep well," she said in a sugary voice. "I think he needs to rest even more." Ricardo felt the anger rise, but he held back. He couldn't reveal himself. He just went to his son, ran his hand across his forehead and said, "It's going to be all right, my champion. Daddy is taking care of you." Henrique's eyes lit up for an instant, as if that simple phrase was the thread of hope he had left. When he left the room, Ricardo realized something terrible. Lorena was starting to notice the change in her husband's eyes, and that made her more dangerous than ever. It was only a matter of time before she took the next step. Ricardo couldn't sleep that night. The weight of his discoveries was crushing him, and the image of Henrique weakening before his eyes never left his mind. Sitting in his office, staring into the void, he remembered Pedro. The street boy had seen the truth before everyone, risking himself to speak. Maybe it was time to look for him again. The next morning, he told Lorena he had important meetings out of town. She seemed to accept it, but her prolonged stare made it clear she didn't fully believe him. Still, Ricardo left determined. The car moved through the busy streets, and the farther he got from the mansion, the lighter the air felt. He looked for the street corners where he had first seen Pedro. It didn't take long to spot the boy's thin silhouette, sitting on the sidewalk, clutching a shabby bag. Ricardo parked and approached. Pedro looked at him with suspicion, but soon recognized the elegant man. "So you're back?" he said, getting up slowly. "I need to talk to you," Ricardo replied in a low tone, "and I need you to be honest with me again." They sat on a nearby bench away from the traffic. Ricardo told him about the cameras, the recordings, the confirmation of what Pedro had said. The boy listened in silence, his eyes wide, then nodded. "I knew it," he murmured. "I always saw her messing with things. I always thought something was wrong." Ricardo held his shoulder. "You were brave, Pedro, braver than me. Now I need your help. I want you to stay close. I might need you more than you think." Pedro's eyes shone, and for the first time a shy smile appeared on his face. "I'll help. I'm a nobody, but if it's to save him, I'll do anything." Ricardo felt a lump in his throat. Life was teaching him an unexpected lesson. True loyalty didn't come from riches, but from hearts that knew the value of truth. Before they parted, Ricardo gave the boy an envelope with money and a clean coat. Pedro tried to refuse, but the millionaire insisted, "It's not charity, it's gratitude. You already saved my son once, and now you're helping me save him again." Pedro smiled with tears in his eyes. In that instant, two such different worlds met in a silent promise. Together they would do everything to protect Enrique. The mansion seemed to breathe a heavy, suffocating air. Ricardo had returned from his meeting with Pedro feeling stronger, but that strength vanished when he saw Enrique again. The boy was pale, his eyes sunken, his body more fragile each day. It was as if life were being slowly drained from him. Lorena, on the other hand, seemed radiant. She walked through the corridors with a serene smile, but there was something in the gleam of her eyes that revealed a different anxiety. Ricardo realized it. She was rushing her plan. Perhaps she had noticed the changes in his behavior. Perhaps she just wanted to shorten the path to her goal. That morning, she brought a bowl of steaming soup to Enrique's room. Ricardo followed her with a watchful eye in disguise. He sat in the armchair as if he were just there to keep company. Lorena brought the spoon to the boy's mouth, but he turned his face away. "I'm not hungry," he murmured. Lorena smiled, patient, but her voice carried an almost threatening firmness. "You need to eat, Enrique. It's for your own good." Ricardo intervened gently. "Let me convince him, dear. Maybe he'll accept it if I give it to him." She hesitated for a second, but handed him the spoon. Ricardo held it, observing the soup closely. The smell was strong, sickening, and the liquid seemed thicker than normal. His heart pounded. Feigning normalcy, he brought the spoon to his lips, but before it touched, he stopped. "It's too hot," he said, putting it back down. Lorena's gaze hardened for an instant, and then she resumed her smile. "Of course, dear, of course. Let it cool down." Ricardo felt the cold go up his spine. It was clearer than ever. Every meal was a risk. That night, while watching the recordings, he confirmed his suspicions once again. The images showed Lorena tampering with hidden vials. The difference now was her haste. Her movements were less careful, almost impatient, as if she feared time was running out. Ricardo realized he couldn't wait much longer. Enrique wouldn't withstand this routine for long, and if he didn't act soon, it might be too late. He closed his eyes, feeling the pain of a helpless father. But soon the memory of Pedro came to his mind, the small boy with a firm gaze, willing to help him. That rekindled a spark of courage. Ricardo knew the war had entered its most dangerous phase. Lorena no longer hid her haste. Enrique was getting weaker and weaker, and he needed to make a decision before the tragedy was irreversible. Night fell over the mansion, heavy with silence and tension. Ricardo had spent the entire day planning his final move. It was no longer enough to observe with hidden cameras. Lorena was getting bold, and Enrique had no time to lose. It was time to capture definitive proof, something that could dismantle any lie. In his office, he reviewed every detail of the plan, discreetly installing a new tiny camera inside a decorative clock in the kitchen. This time, it wouldn't just be the distant view of a security camera. He wanted to see her hands, her movements, every drop of the liquid that fell into Enrique's plate or cup. His heart hammered as he tested the equipment. Everything was ready. Now he just had to wait. The next day, he maintained his routine as if nothing were wrong. He feigned interest in a magazine, chatted about business on the phone, and even laughed at Lorena's fake jokes at breakfast. But inside, every second was calculated. When the afternoon came, Ricardo discreetly retreated to his office and opened the live feed from the new camera. His blood ran cold as he saw Lorena appear in the kitchen. She looked around carefully, like someone who knows they might be watched. Then she took a small transparent vial from her apron pocket. Ricardo zoomed in on the screen, his hands trembling. He clearly saw her pour the drops into the orange juice, stirring quickly with a spoon. Then she put the cup on the tray and smiled to herself, as if celebrating silently. He almost screamed, but he held back. The moment was right there before his eyes. The proof that could save Enrique. Quickly, he grabbed a small portable camera adjusted it in his jacket pocket and went downstairs. He found Lorena already on her way to Henrique's room, carrying the tray with her usual false sweetness. "May I take it myself?" Ricardo said, intercepting her in the hallway. She looked surprised but smiled. "You, dear? How kind." Ricardo took the tray, but instead of going straight to the room, he placed it on a table in the hallway, pretending to adjust something on the tablecloth, and discreetly turned on the pocket camera. He recorded every detail: the cup, the altered liquid, the strong smell rising from it. In the room, Henrique looked at his father, confused, but Ricardo made a subtle sign for him to be silent. He knew that this would be the beginning of Lorena's downfall. The trap was set, and now, for the first time, Ricardo held in his hands the truth that could destroy his enemy. Ricardo couldn't wait long. The weight of the tray was still in his hands when he decided he could no longer prolong that game. He took the adulterated cup to his office and locked the door. He recorded close-up images, showing the vial he had found, hidden in Lorena's apron, and the viscous liquid floating in the juice. With each recording, his heart ached, but it also grew stronger. He had the weapon he needed. A little later, he called Lorena to the office. She entered with a serene smile, but upon seeing the seriousness on her husband's face, she raised her eyebrows. "What happened, Ricardo?" she asked with that sweet voice that had so often deceived him. He took a deep breath and pointed to the computer screen where he had paused the recording. Lorena, in the kitchen, dripping the drops into the cup of juice. Her smile vanished for an instant but soon reappeared, cold and calculated. "So that's it," she said, laughing softly. "You really think I would do something against your son?" "I don't think so, Lorena." "I saw it," Ricardo retorted, his voice firm, almost a contained roar. She walked to the desk, leaning over him. "Ricardo, you're exhausted. You're seeing things. That camera could have been tampered with. Anyone could have put something in that cup." Her eyes flashed. "Are you accusing me without real proof?" Ricardo clenched his fists but didn't respond. He knew she was a master at distorting facts, at playing with words. "Think carefully," she continued, lowering her tone. "If Henrique gets worse, everyone will believe it was your fault due to negligence. No one will believe stories of poison without tests, without reports. You are a powerful man, but even powerful men can be destroyed by rumors." The hidden threat in her words made him freeze. Still, he didn't look away. "I don't just have rumors, Lorena. I have recordings, I have witnesses." She narrowed her eyes. "Witnesses?" Ricardo remembered Pedro, but he didn't mention the name. He didn't want to expose the boy to danger. He just stood firm. "Don't think you're going to win. I will save Henrique, to no matter the cost," Lorena smiled. But this time there was no sweetness in her expression. There was only defiance. "Then let's see who can better protect what they love." She left the office without looking back, leaving Ricardo in a suffocating silence. He knew. The confrontation had truly begun. Ricardo spent the entire night sleepless. Lorena's words echoed like a poison even more dangerous than the liquid in the vial. She not only knew he was suspicious, but now she was willing to turn any move into his ruin. The battle was no longer just for Henrique's health, but also for the truth, his reputation and his own survival. Lying in the armchair in his office, he stared at the paused images of the video. Lorena with the vial in her hands, the drop falling into the cup. It was living proof. But as she herself had said, without medical exams and official reports, it could look like a setup. Ricardo knew the weight of public opinion. He knew that in cases like this, one doubt was enough to make everything fall apart. It was then that an idea crossed his mind, to involve the police. But fear quickly took over. What if Lorena had connections? What if she could manipulate the facts before he presented the recordings? A single wrong step could put Henrique in even greater danger. He decided he would need more. More proof, more witnesses, something impossible to deny. And for that he thought of Pedro. The boy had seen things that no adult in that house had had the courage to see. Perhaps his innocence was the most powerful weapon against Lorena's lies. The next morning, Ricardo took Henrique to a medical appointment under the pretext of routine exams. During the journey, he noticed his son's tired gaze. The boy seemed to want to say something, but he remained silent, fearing the walls had ears. Ricardo squeezed his hand, trying to convey security. At the clinic, He took advantage of Lorena's absence to ask for discreet toxicological tests. The intrigued doctor accepted the request without questioning too much. Ricardo knew he couldn't trust anyone, but it was a necessary risk. Back at the mansion, he found Lorena in the hall, smiling as if nothing had happened. Her gaze, however, was sharp, like someone who already senses betrayal. "How was the appointment?" she asked casually. Ricardo lied naturally. "Just routine, nothing to worry about." She smiled, but her eyes revealed she didn't believe him. That night, alone in his office, Ricardo drew a timeline in a notebook of everything he knew: the recordings, Henrique's symptoms, the tests he was waiting for. And at the top of the page, he wrote in large letters, "Prove, save, win." It was the beginning of a bigger plan. He could no longer back down. Pedro was sleeping, curled up under a piece of old canvas near an alley where he usually took shelter from the rain. The cold of the dawn made his teeth chatter, but his thoughts kept him awake. Since he had spoken with Ricardo, he couldn't get Henrique out of his head. He knew that boy was not at fault for anything, and that his life was in danger. The next morning, Pedro was walking through the streets when he saw something strange. A black car he had seen parked near the mansion a few days before was now stopped in front of a pharmacy. Curious, he watched from afar. To his surprise, he saw Lorena get out of the vehicle, look around quickly and go inside. Minutes later, she came out carrying a small bag that she carefully put inside her purse. Pedro's heart raced. That didn't look like a simple purchase. He decided to follow her discreetly, keeping his distance. He saw her enter a private clinic, hand the bag to a man in a lab coat and leave without looking back. The boy didn't understand exactly what that meant, but he was sure it was something important. Without wasting time, he ran to a public phone and dialed the number Ricardo had given him. The Millionaire's tired but firm voice answered. "Pedro, what happened?" "I saw her, Ms. Lorena. She bought something and gave it to a doctor. I don't know what it is, but it seemed important." Pedro spoke fast, out of breath. Ricardo froze. The possibility of Lorena manipulating doctors or reports terrified him. If she was trying to cover her actions with false documents, it would be even more difficult to unmask her. "You did well to tell me, Pedro. I need you to stay alert, but be careful. I don't want you to risk too much." Pedro nodded, even though he knew Ricardo couldn't see him. "I'm not afraid. So if it's to save Henrique, I'll do anything." The boy's words touched Ricardo deeply. A boy who didn't even have a place to sleep showed more loyalty and courage than many men he had known in his life. That night, Ricardo reflected on what Pedro had said. He realized he wasn't alone. He had someone on his side who saw the truth without fear, and that gave him renewed strength. As he watched Henrique sleep, he whispered to himself, "With Pedro on our side, Lorena won't win." The atmosphere inside the mansion had become suffocating, as if every wall hid secrets and every corner was a silent enemy. Ricardo walked back and forth, restless, anxiously awaiting the results of Henrique's medical tests. He knew those pages could be the key to unmasking Lorena, but he also feared she had already manipulated everything before it reached his hands. Lorena, on the other hand, seemed more serene than ever. Her elegant clothes, her impeccable smile, her sweet voice, everything was even more calculated. But behind the calm, Ricardo noticed a glint in her eyes, a poorly contained haste, an almost palpable anxiety. She knew the net was closing in. On a rainy afternoon, she brought a tray to Henrique's room with a cup of warm milk and some cookies. Ricardo watched from a distance, hidden in the hallway, with a small pocket camera on. He saw her put the vial to the edge of the cup and let several drops fall. More than usual. His heart stopped for an instant. Henrique, tired and sleepy, looked at the milk without suspicion. Lorena approached with the same stage sweetness as always. "Drink, dear, it will help you sleep better." Ricardo couldn't resist. He suddenly entered the room, his voice firm as never before. "Wait." Lorena froze for a second, but quickly regained her smile. "Ricardo, what a scare. I was just taking care of him." He walked to the tray and picked up the cup. The smell was strong, sickening, different from regular milk. Ricardo lifted the cup in front of her, his eyes flashing. "You won't fool anyone anymore." Inside, however, despair consumed him. He knew he couldn't drink that liquid to prove it. He knew he needed to save it as evidence, but he also knew that if he didn't act fast, Henrique could be forced to drink it sooner or later. Lorena took a step forward, trying to regain control. You're getting paranoid, Ricardo. You're letting yourself be carried away by absurd suspicions. Henrique looked at the two of them, scared, not understanding. Ricardo knelt in front of his son and said in a low voice, "Trust me, son. Dad will protect you." Lorena crossed her arms, and for the first time her smile completely vanished. There was only coldness in her gaze. That night, Ricardo locked himself in his office. With the poisoned cup stored in a container, he knew that was the final, most dangerous piece of evidence, but he also understood that time had run out. Lorena would do everything to strike the final blow, and the next move would be the riskiest of all. The mansion was plunged into a tense silence, as if it sensed that something decisive was about to happen. Ricardo had spent the entire day planning his final move. He knew he could no longer confront Lorena with just conversations or hidden recordings. He needed to expose her once and for all, in front of eyes that could not deny the truth. He called 2 trusted employees and asked them to stay alert. In secret, he also contacted the doctor responsible for Henrique's tests, requesting that he come in person to deliver the results that night. Everything had to be synchronized. When evening arrived, Lorena appeared more elegant than ever. She was dressed like someone going to a gala event, but her eyes held that same grim determination. Ricardo realized it. She was ready to complete her plan. A little later, she took a new tray to Henrique's room. Ricardo followed her footsteps in silence, his heart pounding. 2 employees were watching discreetly, hidden in the hallway, and the doctor was already waiting in the living room with the test results in hand. Lorena entered the room, sat next to the boy's bed and said softly, "My dear, I brought you something special. It will help you sleep peacefully." Ricardo appeared at the door before she could bring the cup to Henrique's mouth. "Don't touch him." His voice echoed like thunder. She turned, surprised, but quickly regained her composure. "Ricardo, please, you're overreacting again." He advanced, snatched the cup from her hands and held it up in front of the people who had appeared in the room. "Everyone see, this woman is poisoning my son." The employees exchanged frightened but attentive glances. The doctor approached, took the cup and smelled it. His expression changed immediately. "This is not regular milk. There is something here." Lorena tried to protest, her voice raised. "This is absurd. He's manipulating all of you. He wants to destroy me because he can't stand that I take care of the boy." But at that moment, Ricardo activated the pocket camera and projected the recordings onto a tablet. Lorena dripping liquid into cups, tampering with medicine, smiling alone after altering the food. The images were undeniable. The silence that followed was cut only by Henrique's muffled crying. The boy looked at his father with hope, as if he was finally seeing the light after so long trapped in the shadows. Lorena, in turn, lost her smile for good. Her eyes became cold and hard, and her mask fell before everyone. Ricardo, with a firm voice, declared, "It's over, Lorena. You will not touch my son again." The truth finally was exposed. The weight of the revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap that finally broke. Lorena was removed from the mansion that same night, without the elegance of her facade, with only the grim look of someone who saw their castle of lies crumble before them. Ricardo did not feel immediate relief. Instead, an emptiness took hold of him. Years of trust and the appearance of perfection had dissolved into poison and deception, but above all, his heart screamed with gratitude. Henrique was alive and could now breathe without fear. In the following days, the house found a new rhythm. The doctor confirmed the boy had been poisoned in small doses, enough to keep him weak and dependent. Now free from this invisible prison, Henrique slowly began to regain his strength. In the first few days, he still walked with difficulty, but a glimmer of hope was already returning to his eyes. Ricardo accompanied him every step of the way, as if he were relearning how to be a father. He sat with him in the garden, told him stories from when his mother was still alive, and talked about dreams and memories. Henrique listened attentively, absorbing every word like a lost treasure. And then, on a sunny late afternoon, Pedro appeared again. The street boy, still in worn-out clothes but with a shy smile, hesitated before crossing the gate. Ricardo received him with open arms, as if he were a son returning home. Henrique ran, still fragile, making an effort to take a few steps, and hugged Pedro with all the strength he had. "You saved me. the millionaire boy said, his eyes teary. Pedro smiled awkwardly. "I just told the truth." Ricardo watched the scene with a heavy heart. There before him were two boys whose lives had been marked in such different ways, but who were united by something greater: courage. He approached, placed a hand on each of their shoulders and declared, "From today on, Pedro will no longer live on the street. He will have a home, an education, dignity. He will be part of our family." Pedro couldn't hold back his tears. Henrique, with a sparkle in his eyes that had not been seen for a long time, hugged him even tighter. The mansion, once a stage for lies and silence, now echoed with genuine laughter. The weight of darkness had given way to the promise of a better future. In that instant, Ricardo understood the greatest lesson of his life. Wealth was not in gold, nor in the high walls of a mansion. It was in the courage of a boy who had nothing and still offered everything. And as the sun set behind the garden, the three of them remained together, sealing a new story made not of fear but of hope. If you like this story, please like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos.